The crisis of the Catholic Church is now impossible to ignore. From historically devout countries like Poland to the United States, everything seems to be collapsing. Morality, trust, and the participation of the faithful. What was once an undisputed authority today struggles to even be heard. Why is all this happening? And what is really behind this decline? Find out by watching the video until the end. There is no need to bother great theologians or ecclesiastical analysts to note what is now evident to anyone who cares about the Catholic faith in its authentic and non-negotiable form. We are witnessing a collapse. The pontificate of Pope Francis, despite the optimistic narrative of the official ecclesiastical media, is leaving behind a church that is weaker, more confused, and above all, in a profound identity crisis. The numbers speak for themselves. Priestly vocations are in free fall, a 12% drop from 2019 to 2023, according to the latest data from the Annuarium Statisticum Ecclesias. A trend that cannot be ignored or minimized with the usual rhetoric of the new humanism or the outgoing church. We are not facing a passing cold, but a systemic disease. While the defenders of Vatican II and the spring of the Church continue to celebrate a renewal that exists only on paper, reality shows us an unprecedented demographic and spiritual winter. The comparison with the era of Benedict XVI is merciless. Despite the criticisms of his theological system, Joseph Ratzinger had the courage and the intellectual honesty to say uncomfortable things in defense of Catholic morality. And the fruits, albeit modest, were beginning to be seen. A slight recovery in vocations, a doctrinal clarity that attracted converts, a stability that gave confidence. Then, with Francis, the long wave of the spirit of the Council overwhelmed everything, accelerating a crisis already underway. But it is not just about numbers. It is about souls. It is about a church that has stopped being a sign of contradiction to become an echo of the world. A church that has renounced its language, its symbols, its 1,000-year-old liturgy in the name of hospitality, losing its soul in exchange. And how can one think of attracting young men to the priesthood in a context in which the sacred is ridiculed, doctrine is negotiated, and truth is optional? To make matters worse, there is the obvious collapse of Catholic morality among the faithful. Once upon a time, this would have been unthinkable, but today it is a reality. According to the latest Pew Research study, 70% of American Catholics say they support same-sex marriage, and 59% favor abortion in many cases. These are figures that, until a few decades ago, would have caused scandal. Today, however, they are greeted with silent resignation by many pastors and with a guilty silence by Rome. In other times, anyone who publicly opposed Catholic morality on such serious issues would have been barred from the sacraments until they converted. Now, however, it is often celebrated in ecclesiastical circles as a sign of the times, as if the Church's task were to adapt to the world rather than convert it. And so, figures like Father James Martin, known for his openly anti-church teaching agenda, are given ample space even in the Vatican. It is the paradox of a church that protects the ambiguous and silences the consistent faithful. Meanwhile, the moral formation of Catholics has crumbled. The fault, it is also of a catechesis reduced to slogans, of colorless homilies, and of a liturgy stripped of its sacred character. Young people grow up without fixed points, and when life puts them to the test, they do not find in the Church a guide, but an echo of the world that has already disappointed them. According to a recent report filmed in Poland, the crisis that the Catholic Church is going through is no longer just a fear in the sacristies, but a visible and palpable reality. The images speak for themselves. In 3 churches on a typical Sunday morning, the pews remain mostly empty, and it is not an isolated case. This scenario is repeated in many parts of Europe, where secularization has long undermined the centrality of faith in public life. But that it is also happening in Poland, once a bastion of European Catholicism, is surprising and disturbing. The faithful, when they stop to talk, do not mince their words. Some openly declare that they no longer believe. A toxic institution, some say. It no longer represents me, others confess, especially among the young. The bond that for decades has held together faith and national identity seems to have loosened, perhaps broken in many cases. Young people, interviewed in front of parishes or on university campuses, no longer speak of faith as something personal or spiritual, but at most as a cultural fact, linked to historical memory. John Paul II, a central figure for generations, is today remembered more as a national figure than as a spiritual leader. For me, it only has a historical meaning. I don't feel any spiritual connection, says a girl without hesitation, walking away from a church that evidently she no longer feels is hers. The data also confirms this disaffection. If 30 years ago, over 60% of young Poles declared they practice religion, today it is less than 1 in 4. A collapse that cannot be explained only by the passage of time, but by the growing perception that the Church has lost touch with reality. In this context, the figure of the priest is no longer that of the respected pastor, but is often associated with the abuse of power and distance from everyday reality. And yet, the new evangelization is underway, the Church in dialogue. But dialogue with whom? And at what price? We are facing a dramatic loss of identity. The Church that welcomes everything ends up no longer teaching anything. The Church that no longer judges, no longer saves. This crisis is as much spiritual as it is cultural. And those who think that the future comes from Africa, a continent where vocations and fervor still exist, must deal with the fact that there, as everywhere, Catholic morality is under attack. Some African bishops themselves are asking Rome for local doctrinal concessions on moral issues. Automatic salvation will not come from there unless fidelity to the Catholic truth, whole and uncompromising, is maintained. And as if the vocational and moral desert were not enough, now comes the confirmation of the collapse of faith itself. A recent Pew Research study paints an alarming picture. For every 100 people who enter the Catholic Church, 800 leave. It is not just a matter of baptisms that do not bear fruit, but of a real spiritual hemorrhage. Religious practice diminishes, prayer vanishes, and faith in God, which should be the foundation of everything, crumbles. It is a crisis that cannot be hidden behind optimistic slogans. The Catholic population is rapidly aging, with an ever-shrinking band of young believers. The Church is becoming a place of memory rather than mission, and young people, bombarded by a culture hostile to faith, no longer find in it either identity or strength. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.